develop your price like you develop your product.
You introduce yourself?
Okay.
Go ahead, please be my guest.
I'm Yorick. I'm an amateur pianist in a strip bar. That's my main profession. No. You want a tumor, right?
That's why Carlos loves you so much. Yeah.
No, I always say this because I don't dare to tell my friends and family that I'm an accountant and CFO, because that's too boring. But I'm a co-founder and CFO of Timesteer.ai and the CFO of Hyperfox, two software platforms. The one company exists now for 6 years, the other for 3 years. Both are now more or less at the point of reaching the product market fit point, where we hope to get to the momentum of creating a revenue hockey stick and becoming really successful.
Okay, cool. You said already I'm CFO, in-house CFO specifically for those companies itself. As a CFO and founder, when did pricing become a financial problem and not a commercial one?
I think that pricing is rarely a financial problem. It's a commercial problem. Pricing is a big facilitator in your go-to-market, obviously, and to reaching customers and signing up customers. The problem, I think, is that there's too little experimenting with pricing, and that a lot of founders and a lot of startups have the idea that they need to create one price list out of the blue, and that's the truth, and that they have to work with it for the whole of their existence, where I think it's, as we discussed before, that it's important that as you develop your product, you start developing a pricing model in a very customer-centric way, not starting from your product specifications or your product layout, but really from what's the added value to the customer, and where solutions for the customer, and for what additional solution would a customer be willing to pay more. The return on investment calculators that you see on quite a lot of SaaS products and other kinds of products are very typically designed from the product perspective, not from the customer perspective, and therefore often lack a connectivity. There's a lot of issues from customers to understand the price models, because they start from the product and not from their mindset. And in that sense, I think that it's very relevant to test pricing from very early phase, and as you pitch your product from the first minimal viable product, also take into consideration what would customers be willing to pay for this, and develop your price like you develop your product.
Okay, but yeah, founders often technical, fall in love with technical things.
Yep.
Yeah, okay, good.
And then they build a price list in the same methodology or in the same logic than they built their product. And often that's irrelevant to what the customer experience.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
It's a bit, but I have to think how to elaborate the model. It's something that pops up now, but you have Microsoft Word, and in Microsoft Word, there's a spelling checker. Would the customer be willing to pay more if you add the spelling checker, or would the customer just think that it's logical that there is an basic, that there's a spelling checker in your Word? That's something that you need to figure out if you're the developer of Word and want to bring it in the market. Maybe the customer is not willing to pay for the spelling checker, but is willing to pay for cloud storage of the documents, or the other way around. And probably, and often for the product team and for the founder and in the early phase of the company, they get stuck in this, for me, the spellings checker is something additional that I need to develop. And so that's something that I put in my second tier of my price list. And a customer that wants this has to pay additional, where the customer doesn't feel it like that. And then the two roads start to separate, and it becomes more and more difficult to go to market with your price list and with your product as a result of that.
On the P&L sides of the business itself, do you often see leaking buckets, things that should have been tackled in pricing, or in pricing for me is value capturing, is also the service offering therein, that you need to push on in the organization to say, guys, girls?
I think there's a very, very big difference in early stage companies and more mature companies. As long as there's not really a product market fit and you're not really accelerating your growth, I think pricing should be also in an experimental phase, like your product is at that moment. You need to test, you need to check, you need to try and find the truth. I'm always a bit reluctant to have these early phase companies, charging prices for experimental products, for minimal viable products. Give it for free, but ask what the people would want to pay for it. Check if we would sell you this solution at this price. Would this be relevant for you, or too expensive, too cheap? Would you be willing to pay more? What would for you be a relevant tier setup? What would for you be relevant in the bronze, in the silver, in the gold? Not think that you know this, but ask it to the customer. But that's in the early phase of the company, and there you need to figure out what the dynamics of your price model could be. It's only at the moment that you go to the product market fit and you start expanding that it becomes important to slowly. It's not a big priority. First, you need to get your customers, you need to build your market and get your customers and your revenue. And once that this is going on and this is happening, then it starts to become relevant to basically redo the whole testing phase that you did up front, that with your customer base and with your product that you have in the markets that you have, if there's possibilities to adjust the price, to go a bit higher, to go a bit cheaper, to offer more free stuff, to even introduce a freemium tier. But it's not something that just becomes obvious or visible in a P&L. It's very rare that you see in a P&L a sign or an element where it say, but if you change the pricing, then this problem is solved. If only it was this easy.
Okay, I see. But it can, okay, good. You're an atypical CFO for me for now already, because most of them I hear talking about cash flow and cash flow optimization.
Yeah, but that's very important and very relevant for a mature organization. That's the optimizing of a growing bigger company. That's a comfortable situation if you get there. A lot of people that will watch this and that hire your services and that I see around me, they are hoping to get to this phase that they can start managing their cash flow and that they can optimize their cash flow. The first couple of years, it's getting cash from anywhere, anyhow, and giving your product for free to make sure that you get use cases, customer references, that you are able to build a market and land your product. And that's also, it's where the whole world, our world, the scale-up startup world runs around. The VCs and the external capital to allow you the time and give you the money to do all these experiments to get to the point where the money starts coming in and you can start optimizing your cash flow and your revenue
But later,
But quite some later in the life phases of an organization.
How do you look towards discounting?
In the early phase, as much as you need discounting, you need to land your product with real customers that start using your software to get the relevant feedback to come to the product market fit. Once you're in the product market fit and you start expanding, you need to buy your market share, and buying your market share is expensive. If at that moment you need to discount to get this reference customer, please discount, get a reference customer. It will do you more good than the additional €1,000 ARR or even MRR. Get the customers. Again, it's only if you have your market share, if you feel confident, if you feel comfortable, if you're really scaling and if things are really starting to work, if in Dutch we have this expression, if the as a mayonnaise pakt, if the things start working and accelerating, then it becomes important to really start managing this.
But before that, it's just too early.
In my opinion, yes.
But do you then need a CFO in these early phases?
Luckily, a CFO does a lot of other things than that. The CFO's function or big added value in early phase startup scale up is help the founder to manage the funds that are available typically from investors. Mm-hmm. It's not to optimize per se the pricing. Anyway, pricing is, I think, in a very important way a topic for sales and product marketing more than it is with the CFO. The CFO has, of course, a saying in it, should have a saying in it.
On which part should he or she have a say on it?
The moment that you do not sell small partial things anymore, but you start signing up master agreements with bigger customers that could impact long-term and future revenues, that's the moment that the CFO needs to make sure that also the legal work and everything around the deal making sets out very clearly that the pricing and the setup that's at the table at that moment is a temporary thing, and that there's still an opening to raise the prices, to change the scope, to change the tiers of the product, etc., etc.
So you stay. So long-term contracts for cash optimization or short-term contracts to make sure that you stay lean and mean?
Yeah.
What's your preference?
The preference is imposed to you by the market, and I think very often you need to go into a model where you sell a POC or a pilot, and from the moment that it's POC or pilot, I don't care about price. I just make sure that it doesn't auto-renew and that it's preferably 3 to 6 months and tops a year.
Mm-hmm. But it's paid.
Or not.
Or not. Okay.
Or not. And the moment that we've proven our value and we checked the pricing and there's a fit and the customer sees the added value and wants to continue in a long-term collaboration and buys a license in whatever shape or form, at that moment, then I want to get involved and I want to have a saying in the pricing and the discounts, etc.
Okay. You talked a lot about funding companies that are. Would your view be different for a pure bootstrapped? My philosophy is I want to be bootstrapped. I hire you as a CFO. Is there something that you then say, okay, but then my message would be different to you?
It's exactly the same setup, in my opinion, regardless where the money comes from. You need to spend it wisely, and you need to spend early enough money to know and to get to this product market fit moment, which is just, it's essential in in the life of the company if you need to reach this as quickly as possible, and it will cost you money.
So that's
both as development cost, as personnel cost, as your own salary will not be what you want it to be. And pricing is just at that moment, you cannot guarantee that you will earn significant amounts of money with a product that's not fit, that's not yet finished, and so you have to start small and discount or give it for free, but you need to get the customer approval of what you're doing, and that's also the trigger for the external capital, but it should also be the trigger for investing more of your own money in the company.
Mm-hmm.
It's not because you think that you have invented at the kitchen table at 2:00 at night the perfect solution for a problem that you imagined, that the customers have this problem, perceive it in the same way as you perceive it, and like your solution, let alone pay for the solution. You know, it's the trap of many of companies. It's typically technical people that invent a solution, then start looking for a problem, and then start checking if there is a market for the people that want their solution for the problem that they found.
Yeah.
Ideally, you start your company from identifying a problem, checking if there's a market for a solution, and then develop the solution. But it's totally the other way around.
The reality today, yeah. The only thing I don't agree with you is give it for free. I think even in the search phase, you should somewhere be capturing fair value, because free doesn't express value and is also something, and but then they don't invest either on their side.
I hear what you're saying and I get it, but at the same time, there's other ways to work around them not investing in your product, especially if you do this for a short term and you can contractually agree on a collaboration and on a way on working together in a POC pilot setup. Again, I think it's important, not for free, in the sense you don't walk to the customer or the prospect and tell, well, let's just try this for free. No, you tell to the customer, I think that you have a problem and I want to investigate if you have this problem. And I think I have a solution and I want to check if my solution works for your problem. And typically, I would ask you 25,000 euros to do this for a 6-month period. And we will invest this, you will invest that. But since we are at the phase that we're at, and since we would love you to be our reference customer, I'm going to discount you for 100%, or for 75%, or 50%, or whatever. Which, in my opinion, is a different thing than bring it on the table for free. It's not for free. You discount it because you want this to work and to happen.
Ask something for reference customer. You are please ask commitments on their side back as well. No, very good. Is there one thing that for you as a CFO is so obvious related to pricing that most founders don't get at all?
It's a tough one, because as I explained, pricing for me is not per se a CFO matter.
Mm-hmm.
The most relevant thing I think that I can say is a bit of a summary of a lot of the things we discussed earlier. It's check price models, test it, and do it from a customer perspective, not from your own perspective. It's not because you're the founder that you know how the customer perceives it. That's also customer centricity, not inventing a price model from your product or founder view, but do this from a customer perspective and test it, check it, change it, version 1, version 2, version 3, because you need to be sure your price model needs to be validated before you can really expand. It's also just a part of the product market fit. It's the part, regardless, if you start hiring salespeople, if you start working through a partner channel to sell your software, you need to have a price list. How will you send these people on the street if they need to experiment with the price model? Then your partner model will not succeed. Your salesperson will fail. You need to get to this point that also your pricing is checked, tested, and validated, and ready to go to market. And they just need to do it. They need to have it challenged time after time after time after time.
How do you push them back? You really are an atypical CFO compared to others that I know. They talk about long contracts, they talk about cash flow optimization, they talk about
Again, immature companies, yes.
Yeah, immature. Okay.
Immature companies, yes. Been there, done that. We worked together for a company that was for years and years in business, and then it really becomes important to indeed make sure that contract term is managed, make sure, and again, there's also all kind of versions. Do you want to auto-renew or do you want not to auto-renew? So you have a sales moment every year that you can go to into a new negotiation, that you can bring new product features, new price lists, or auto-renew is a bit easier. There's pros, there's cons for all of the systems, but that's a different world than the world I'm in today, and what I have been talking about today. I'm now talking about companies that are working towards this product market fit point, or the 12, 18 months after this point, where it's still struggling and finding out and figuring out. And I would love to be in the position where I can go to my sales manager and to the product marketing guy and discuss with them, maybe we should raise the price with a couple of percent, and maybe we should skip the bronze tier and only sell silver and gold. But
no, okay, but it's good, and I appreciate really who you are for that phase of the. I see a lot of founders having then maybe a bit late stage CFOs as advisors on board.
Yep.
How can they push back then? Because I think you have really valuable insights the way you approach it with a very open mindset.
But okay, on the risk of getting a bit off topic, for me, and that's really the core of what I think a CFO in a startup and a scale-up should do, is provide the founder and the investors and stakeholders, relevant stakeholders, with basically a simulation tool. A budget is not a static thing. A budget is a dynamic model where almost every line relates to the next line. If you want more leads, you will need more marketing. If you want more marketing, you will need to hire a marketeer or an agency. If you hire a marketeer, then probably you will need a bigger office. If you have a bigger office, also the heating and the water will raise. Your insurances will raise. All these things need to be in a model, but part of this model is also your revenue build-up. And there's a lot of assumptions that you need to make in the building of a budget like that. Of course, there's the price. Do you invoice monthly, quarterly, annually? Do you invoice upfront? Do you invoice after the term? Is your license including consumption? Do you separate license and consumption? But make all this in a simulation tool. Make a dynamic Excel sheet that has monthly numbers for at least 3 years up front. And with my CEOs, both in Timesteer and in Hyperfox, this is something I would say, work together weekly. If it's not weekly, it's because one of us is abroad but where we sit together at this Excel and we're playing. We do not sign up 30 new customers this quarter, but we do 35. What's the effect on EBITDA? And what's EBITDA is nice, but that's mostly nice for the annual reports. What everyone just wants, what's your runway of your cash? So what's the effect on the runway that you have with your cash? 5 more customers. Okay, but it's not 5 more, it's 5 less. Okay, then we 1 month. Okay, if we raise the price by 5%, okay, what's the effect on the runway? What's the effect on the EBITDA? What's the effect of getting the invoice paid only after 60 days instead of after 30 days? Your model should be able to simulate all this. So you give your CEO a hands-on, real tool where you can simulate the whole operations of the company by just turning the buttons and play with this and understand the dynamics, also the financial dynamics within your organization. And that's the moment that you as a CEO can make relevant decisions on how to move forward and how to grow. The more mature the company is, the more of these parameters and assumptions are replaced by real data. And your model gets better and better and better, to the point where if you are a mature company that runs for 6, 7, 8 years, that you will be perfectly able to simulate, let's hire an additional there, let's hire him now, or let's hire him in 3 months. And the whole effects of all of these things will just fall directly into numbers that you can use for your budget and for your operational decisions that you make to run the company. Mm-hmm. That's what I think that the CFO should do with the company from an early phase on, preferably even before you start, because the financial plan that you bring to the bank, that you bring to your investors, should already be based on a model and not just on a static document that you fill out. Whatever investor you will encounter, they will ask you 3 questions and immediately understand whether you understand the dynamics of your company or not. The only way to understand it is to simulate it.
Okay, good.
And that's where you can really start checking without yet going to a customer, or just check what, if I would propose to the customer a price 5% higher, what would bring this to me? And if in your financial model you see that if you raise the price by 5%, in the phase and the state and the shape you're in, it will only impact your runway by a month. Probably it makes no sense to bother. Mm-hmm. And just stick with it for now. Okay, it could become relevant later on, but not now, because. But it's just one of the zillion elements that make part of running a company. And
it's complicated.
If it was easy and it was only 3 parameters that you had to manage, we would have more successful companies.
True. Cool. Something you still wanted to say that you thought we're going to talk about that, or?
No, it's almost time for Duvel.
Almost time for Duvel. All right, good.